The NCAA tournament has long been filled with mid-major darlings, but if SEC Commissioner Greg Sankey gets his way, he will rob March Madness of its magic and destroy the final bastion of purity in college athletics.
You are Locked On Zags, your daily podcast on the Gonzaga Bulldogs. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
What is going on, y'all? Happy Friday and welcome into the Locked On Zags podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I'm your host and longtime Gonzaga podcaster, Andy Patton, here to provide news and updates on all things Zag athletics. Today's episode of Locked On Zags is brought to you all by FanDuel. Folks, make every moment more. Right now, new customers who join today will get $200 in bonus bets if your first bet of $5 or more is a win. So visit FanDuel.com/LockedOn today to get started. All right, y'all, we got a jam-packed episode today of Locked On Zags. We're going to discuss Zoom Diallo's recruitment. Mike Hopkins out at the University of Washington. Could Zoom reopen his recruitment? Could Mark Few and the Zags get involved there? We also got some updated bracketology projections. Last time we get to do that because the next episode will be the day after Selection Sunday. We're also going to take a look at the mass exodus of talent at Pepperdine following the firing of Lorenzo Romar, what that might mean for Mark Few and the Zags. But first, we lead today's show with a disturbing conversation recorded and discussed in an ESPN article from Greg Sankey, the commissioner of the SEC. We've talked about Greg Sankey a handful of times on this podcast, predominantly in the offseason, but Greg Sankey does not like that there are only 68 teams in the NCAA tournament. Frankly, Greg Sankey does not like that every single SEC team is not playing in the NCAA tournament, and he does not like that the teams that are playing in the NCAA tournament are schools that are smaller than his, that he hasn't heard of, and he believes that that is wrong. Now, he's incorrect about this, and almost everybody who watches college basketball, who enjoys college basketball, who are fans of college basketball, agree. But where we are at is that money rules all. Money talks. And right now, the fear is that Greg Sankey will find a way, along with this new partnership that he has created with the Big Ten, the two conferences that control college athletics more than the NCAA, more than the TV media deals, more than anybody else in college athletics. The Big Ten and the SEC rule all. And they don't want mid-major schools in the NCAA tournament, because they don't make money when Indiana State or Drake or Bradley or Wichita State or et cetera, when those teams are in the big dance. They don't make money. But they make money if they can find a way to cram a very average Texas A&M team into the NCAA tournament, or Mississippi State or Ole Miss. And they're going to find a way to make it happen. And up to this point, we have assumed that that was the direction they were planning to go. They floated expanded NCAA tournament. And yes, there was a recent report, I believe it was by Dana O'Neill at The Athletic, that indicated that the current conversations around NCAA tournament expansion are only talking about potentially expanding to 72. So we're not talking about wide-scale 96-team NCAA tournament projections right now. But in a recent interview, Greg Sankey, speaking over the phone, quotes were taken in an article at ESPN. This is what he said. He said, quote, "Nothing remains static. I think we have to think about the dynamics around Division I and the tournament." Okay, not exactly a slamming quote. That doesn't necessarily indicate anything. He did, however, mention specifically UCLA's run to the Final Four in 2021. You Zags fans will certainly remember that run and how it ended. He also mentioned Syracuse's run to the Sweet 16 in 2018, mentioning that both of those started as play-in games, mentioning them specifically because they are Power 6 teams that made it to a deep run. And he indicated that these Power 6 teams are good enough to make these deep runs, even if they were pedestrian in the regular season. And his argument, therefore, is that more 500 Power 6 teams should make the NCAA tournament. So few people are advocating for this. So few people want to see a 500 Northwestern team. They're better than that this year, but just as an example. So few people want this year's Syracuse team is a good example. Wake Forest and Pitt, those two teams just played each other on Thursday evening. Wake Forest secured the victory. Pitt probably out of the NCAA, or excuse me, Pitt secured the victory. Wake Forest maybe out of the tournament picture. Regardless, if Greg Sankey had his way, both those teams are in easily. And he wants to get rid of the auto bids. He does not want those mid-major teams, those 16 seeds, the Fairleigh Dickinsons, the St. Peters, even going beyond that, the VCUs, the Georgia Masons that make those Final Four runs, Florida Gulf Coast, Oral Roberts. These are the teams, the stories, the highlights. This is what people love about college basketball. At this point, it's not that he can't see it. There's no way he can't see this. He just doesn't care. He just doesn't care. He has enough power. He has enough authority. He has enough money to say, well, we're just going to make it so that the 13 seed, instead of being a plucky team from the Ivy League like Princeton, is going to be Ole Miss. And we're going to be subjected to Ole Miss versus some other Power 6 school as a 4-13. And if the 13 seed Ole Miss wins, nobody cares. It's not an exciting upset. It's just a Power 6 team beating another Power 6 team. But they believe they'll make more money. And they will. They'll make more money because they'll have more units in the SEC. There's a possibility in their argument that they'll see more fans because there's more fans of Ole Miss basketball than there are of Drake basketball or what some other mid-major school. And I don't know that I necessarily agree with that. Certainly there are more fans, donors, alumni at a school like Ole Miss. I don't mean to pick on them specifically. They're just the example that came to my mind. But yeah, there's more money there. There's more fans there. But there are more people who watch college basketball to see those mid-majors, to see those upsets happen, and to just want desperately to kick that to the curb, to just eliminate that. It's one of the last pure things in college athletics. And I'm not an anti-NIL person. I'm not an anti-transfer portal person. I think there needs to be some more regulations. That's the majority opinion at this point. I'm not here to have that conversation. We'll have it another time. But we are losing some of the elements of college athletics that have made it what it has been so successful at for decades. And the NCAA tournament and the auto bid version of the NCAA tournament, that is one of the last pure things. And they're trying to take it away. And there's not a lot stopping them. That's what's so hard about this. That's what's so frustrating. I'm also curious where they're going to find coaches. Quick, this is off the top of my head. SEC coaches, Chris Jans, he's the coach at Mississippi State. He was at New Mexico State. He got that job because he won NCAA tournament games as a 12 seed at New Mexico State. John Calipari, the most notable example, of course, coming from Memphis, having a lot of success in a mid-major school, getting that job at Kentucky. Nate Oates came from Buffalo. Eric Musselman came from Nevada. Like, there are a handful of other coaches in the SEC. Todd Golden, I know San Francisco didn't have lengthy NCAA tournament success, but they made the field. And that was what got Todd Golden the job at Florida. It is so frustrating that they're just throwing away this part of college basketball that makes it what it is. Trying to. They haven't succeeded yet. And it may not happen next year. It may not happen 5 years from now. It may not even happen 10 years from now, although I'm not holding my breath that it'll be the exact same with the mid-majors 10 years from now. It is an unfortunate part of it. Yes, it has obvious ramifications for Gonzaga as a school not in a major conference. I didn't even get into that part of the conversation because I think it's obvious, and we'll have plenty more realignment conversations in the not too distant future here on Locked On Zags. But the ultimate story here is that one of the best things about college basketball, one of the best things in sports, the NCAA tournament, is in serious jeopardy of losing a bunch of its magic because of greed. And that sucks. I want to move on to talk about Mike Hopkins losing his job at the University of Washington. We're actually going to talk about two Washington coaches losing their jobs. We're going to close the show talking about Lorenzo Romar losing his job at Pepperdine. But starting with Mike Hopkins and the loss of his job as the head coach of the Washington Huskies, never had a lot of success there, 17-15 this year. Was 118 and 106 overall. Only made one NCAA tournament. That was back in 2018-19. It was mostly Lorenzo Romar's guys on that roster. But Hopkins did land Zoom Diallo, top 25 prospect at the time in the class of 2024, originally at Curtis High School in Tacoma, Washington, transferred to Prolific Prep, a high-level basketball program in California. He committed to Washington over Gonzaga, over Arizona, over USC. Rumors that there was a big NIL attachment to his deal with Washington, but now the coach that recruited him is out. And a lot of times guys reopen their recruitment when that happens. Personally, I'm not sure I think that's going to happen here with Zoom. Certainly wouldn't say anything with 100% confidence because I don't know. But it sounds like Zoom picked Washington, again, in part because of the NIL deal, which is assumingly still in place, and in part because he wanted to start. He's not going to start at Gonzaga in 2024. At least he is not going to be promised a starting job by Mark Few, because Ryan Nembhard is going to come back. Nolan Hickman's going to come back. Obviously, they could not, but the expectation is that they will. And while Zoom Diallo is a very talented player, he's fallen down the rankings. I said a top 25 player at the time. None of the major recruiting services right now have him as a top 25 player in the 2024 class because he has struggled his senior year. That's another reason. I don't think you reopen your recruitment when your stock is falling. That seems like a bad idea. I don't think you reopen your recruitment when your stock is falling and you, again, allegedly got a huge NIL payout. I don't think you reopen your recruitment if one of the main things you're looking for is a starting job and the school you're going to in Washington is losing Xavier Wheeler because he is a fifth-year senior. It's losing Paul Mulcahy because he is a fifth-year senior. There is still a starting spot wide open for the Washington Huskies next year. Obviously, it depends what coach they bring in. If they land Danny Sprinkle from Utah State, huge hire for them. I think Zoom stays. If they land Mark Pope at BYU, massive hire. Don't necessarily think it's going to happen, but Mark Pope did play at Washington. There is a connection there. I think he stays. Kyle Smith at Washington State, if he makes that jump, which would be wild, I think he stays. If they make an underwhelming hire, maybe Zoom opens his recruitment, sees what else is out there. Maybe Tommy, maybe Mark, maybe Andy Enfield at USC is working the phones, trying to see if they can convince him to jump ship. Could be happening. I mean, it probably is happening. Whether it actually convinces him to do so, hard to see. My guess right now is that Zoom Diallo is not going anywhere. But anytime a high-profile player commits to a school who then fires their head coach, it is worth keeping an eye on. And that's what we're doing here with Zoom Diallo in terms of the Zags. Well, Gonzaga is still trending towards a 7th seed in March and is our final episode before Selection Sunday, and we officially know where they're going to play next year. Next week, we're going to project. We're going to listen to more bracketology projections. We're also going to talk about what games happen on Thursday, what games are happening on Friday that might be worth watching to keep an eye on whether Gonzaga could move up or down a seed line. All of that is coming up after a word from today's sponsor, Robinhood. Did you know that even if you have a 401k for retirement, you can still have an IRA? Robinhood has the only IRA that gives you a 3% boost on every dollar you contribute when you subscribe to Robinhood Gold. But get this, now through April 30th, Robinhood is even boosting every single dollar you transfer in from other retirement accounts with a 3% match. That's right, no cap on the 3% match. Robinhood Gold gets you the most for your retirement thanks to their IRA with a 3% match. This offer is good through April 30th. So get started at Robinhood.com/boost. Subscription fees apply. And now for some of the legal information. Claim as of Q1 2024 is validated by Radius Global Market Research. Investing involves risk, including potential loss. Limitations apply to IRAs and 401ks. 3% match requires Robinhood Gold for 1 year from the date of the first 3% match. Must keep Robinhood IRA for 5 years. The 3% matching on transfers is subject to specific terms and conditions. Robinhood IRA is available to U.S. customers in good standing. And Robinhood Financial LLC, member SIPC, is a registered broker-dealer. Today's episode of Locked On Zags is also brought to you by Amazon Fire TV. Folks, Fire TV is your destination for sports, from live games to highlights to in-depth analysis. Fire TV offers amazing viewing experiences with smart TVs, as well as the Fire TV stick that you can plug into your existing TV that provides access to millions of movies and TV episodes, as well as free and live TV. Whether it's March Madness or opening weekend for baseball, you're going to want to have your Fire TV. Our family, we have Amazon Fire Sticks on every single TV in our house. We love the layout, the user experience, the interface, all of it is top notch. Plus the remote is handy and has buttons that take you directly to Prime Video, Netflix, Disney Plus, and Hulu, the 4 that we are using the most over here. Fire TV recently created Fire TV channels to deliver a constant supply of the latest videos from your favorite sports brands, all of it for free. That includes all of us at Locked On and most of the big pro leagues and college conferences as well. So Fire TV channels let you dive into all of the game analysis, highlights, and more to keep you up to date on the latest in the world of sports. March Madness, NBA, MLB, and more. So check out Fire TV channels on Fire TV and Alexa devices. To learn more, visit www.amazon.com/LockedOnFireTV. All right, folks, segment 2, still Andy Patton, still Locked On Zags podcast, and we are taking a look at the latest bracketology reports from March 14th as we record this in the evening on Thursday. So some of these will have changed by the time you're listening to this on Friday, but it is the most up-to-date information. We did this on Thursday's episode of Locked On Zags as well. A handful of those sites that we talked about on Thursday did not update for Friday, so we have not provided those ones here, but for the few that we did, we saw a few slight changes. Gonzaga still in that 6, 7, 8 range. No dramatic changes in one day, as you would expect, but some of the opponents Gonzaga was projected to play have changed, and we want to talk a little bit about some of those teams and what that could look like for the Zags when we get around to Selection Sunday. First, Rocco Miller, his updated. He was the one who had Gonzaga as a 6 seed on Wednesday's bracketology report. On Thursday, he still has them as a 6 seed playing in Pittsburgh. This time, the 11 seed they're facing is James Madison, a team that's pulled off some major upsets this season. The 3 seed is Duke. Now, this was posted before Duke lost to NC State. Very curious what that means for the Blue Devils. Could see them falling down onto the 4 or maybe even the 5 seed line. Probably still a 4 seed. Honestly, maybe still a 3 seed, but definitely not carrying a lot of momentum into the NCAA tournament for the Blue Devils. Joe Lunardi still has Gonzaga as a 7 seed in Charlotte, taking on a 10-seeded Oklahoma team. They were taking on TCU. TCU beat Oklahoma, bumped them down onto the 10 seed line. The 2 seed remains North Carolina in Charlotte. A brutal draw for Gonzaga if Lunardi ends up correct here. Bleacher Report has Gonzaga as a 7 seed in Memphis, taking on a 10-seeded Mississippi State team. I referenced Chris Jans earlier, the head coach at Mississippi State, former New Mexico State head coach as well. The 2 seed and Bleacher Report's bracketology report is Marquette. Tough matchup, especially with a healthy Tyler Kolek in the mix. Mike DeCourcy at FS1 has Gonzaga as a 7 seed in Salt Lake, taking on a 10-seeded Oklahoma team. That is the second time we mentioned Porter Moser and the Sooners. And the 2 seed for DeCourcy's bracket is Arizona. Again, I'll reiterate, feels like a real possibility if Gonzaga and Arizona line up as potential 2 seeds and 7 seeds that they're going to be in the same bracket. The committee's really going to love the enticement, the excitement, the intrigue of a potential Mark Few versus Tommy Lloyd matchup in the second round of the NCAA tournament. And frankly, I do not blame them. Jerry Palm at CBS has Gonzaga as an 8 seed in Brooklyn, taking on a 9 seed Oklahoma. The third time we see the Sooners lining up as a potential matchup for Gonzaga. Porter Moser, the former head coach at Loyola Chicago, led them to that Final Four run. Oklahoma is a good team, very good defensive team, played really well in the non-conference, stumbled a bit in conference play. If that ends up being the matchup, very excited to potentially preview that one with you all. The 1 seed in this lineup is UConn. Tough matchup for the Zags, as we know from that game in December. Gonzaga's a lot better since then. UConn has improved as well. That would be a fun second round matchup for the Zags. Washington Post has Gonzaga as an 8 seed as well in Indianapolis, taking on a 9-seeded Colorado State team with Purdue as the 1 seed. They updated their bracket, but that all stayed the same for Gonzaga. A couple results on Thursday that mattered in terms of potential seed changes for Gonzaga. We were rooting for Wisconsin to get upset by either Rutgers or Maryland. Maryland ended up beating Rutgers and then getting crushed by Wisconsin. 31-point win for the Badgers. We wanted Wisconsin to lose that one. They won it. Now they play Northwestern on Friday. And guess what? The tide has now turned. We are rooting for Wisconsin to beat Northwestern. Northwestern's kind of in that 8-9 range. If they pull off an upset, they could climb into that 7-seed territory, where Wisconsin probably also ends up in that 7-seed territory. However, if Wisconsin wins, they're probably a 5 or a 6. Northwestern stays in that 9-10 region. Gonzaga's a little bit less competition in the area that they're at right now. We were rooting for BYU to pull off an upset or to beat Texas Tech. It felt ugly and not fun to root for BYU. Fortunately, I suppose, Texas Tech handled BYU pretty easily, blasted them in the first half, ended up coasting to a 14-point victory in the second half. The problem is now both BYU and Texas Tech feel like they're in that 6-7 seed range, a little bit more competition for Gonzaga in that area. Texas Tech takes on Houston Friday at 4 p.m. Pacific time. If Texas Tech pulls off a huge upset over Houston, that could bump them a little bit further into the 6, maybe even 5-seed territory. Whereas if they lose to Houston, they probably stay in that 7-seed range. So I guess we're rooting for an upset if Texas Tech can pull that one off there. Utah State took down Fresno State by 13. Not a surprise there. Fresno State went 4-14 in the Mountain West this year. In fact, this game resulted in Coach Justin Hudson getting let go after the game because it was a rough year for the Bulldogs. Utah State now takes on San Diego State at 6:30 Pacific time here on Friday. We also have Florida versus Georgia. That game is going on as I'm recording this right now. Georgia is up 5 at just about halftime in that one. By the time you're listening to this, of course, you'll know the result. If Florida does get upset, that probably pushes them into that 9, maybe even 10 seed territory. Good news for the Zags. And then Washington State and Stanford still going on as we're recording right now, but Wazoo has held a 15 to 20 point lead for the entirety of the second half of this game. So by the time you're listening again, quite likely Wazoo has picked up the victory. We're wanting Stanford to pull off the upset, but Wazoo, this puts them probably in that 6, maybe even all the way up into the 5 seed territory. So at this point, they're not really competing with spots for Gonzaga. They're probably very likely going to have a higher seed than the Zags when that big dance rolls around. A couple games to watch on Friday. Actually already mentioned most of them. Wisconsin at Northwestern. We want Northwestern to lose. Utah State at San Diego State. We want Utah State to lose, as much as it's not fun to root for San Diego State. They're already a higher seed than Gonzaga, so Utah State losing would be good for the Bulldogs. Texas Tech at Houston. We want Tech to lose. We want them to win that one, potentially push themselves up a little bit higher. And then we got Nebraska, and they're going to play either Indiana or Penn State. We want Nebraska to lose. So whoever wins between Indiana and Penn State, we want them to beat Nebraska. Nebraska losing means they don't climb closer into that 7 seed, 8 seed territory where they could potentially push Gonzaga down a seed line. We're going to close out the show today talking about Lorenzo Romar's firing, which led to a mass exodus of talent from Pepperdine's program. What does it mean for Mark Few and the Zags? All of that coming up after a word from today's sponsor, Nissan. Are you the kind of driver that likes to push things just a little bit further? Have you ever wondered what adventure could be just around the next corner? Because our friends at Nissan have a lineup of SUVs with the capabilities to take your adventure to the next level. The 2024 Nissan Rogue is perfect for city drives and great escapes. And if you need something, you can call on the class-exclusive built-in Google Assistant. Gone are the days of connecting your phone. Google Assistant, Google Maps, and the Google Play Store are built right into the 12.3-inch HD touchscreen infotainment system. And the 2024 Rogue is the perfect mid-size crossover for your next adventure. Or how about the 2024 Nissan Pathfinder, which has room for up to 8, an expansive cargo capacity, and advanced available 4x4 capability. With 284 horsepower and up to 6,000 pounds of towing capacity, when adventure calls, the Pathfinder is there to answer. Take the Nissan Rogue, Nissan Pathfinder, or Nissan Armada and go find your next big adventure. Shop nissanusa.com. All right, folks, segment 3, closing out the show and the week here on Locked On Zags, talking about Pepperdine. Believe it or not, we're also going to close talking a little bit about the Gonzaga baseball squad as well. But Pepperdine has lost 3 incredibly key players. They had a big 3. We talked about it both times we previewed Pepperdine, and actually after the first game when Gonzaga did a really good job of slowing these 3 guys down. Houston Millette, Javon Porter, Michael Ajayi. All of these players have declared their intent to enter the NCAA transfer portal. None of them are expected to be back at Pepperdine next year, barring a very surprise hire that can somehow manage to retain any of this talent here. And look, this was always kind of the expectation. We've talked about Lorenzo Romar a lot on this podcast. We've talked about his tendency to recruit high-level talent and to not win basketball games with said high-level talent. But part of the reason people ask me a lot, it was a common mailbag question, common discussion on threads on the Discord channel, why hasn't Pepperdine fired Lorenzo Romar? And outside of the fact that he's a very famous alumni, he's a good fundraiser, various other things that he's a person that seems to be well-liked by everybody. Like, that's a hard person to fire when you are well-liked, when you are recruiting, when you are raising money. But outside of that, the talent that Romar brought in, these kids were attached to him. And you knew that firing Romar at any point in his college career when he was going to get let go, that it was going to cause a lot of players to be lost. And you have to then get in a player or a coach who can recruit at that level. Because if the coach is better at winning basketball games but can't recruit at the same level, are you really in a better spot? I think a lot about what happened at the University of Portland when Eric Reveneau was there. I took over. I worked at UP for 2 years, the final year of Eric Revenue's career as the head coach, the first year of Terry Porter's career as the head coach. Portland decided that Reveneau, despite being excellent at graduating talent, despite being pretty good at recruiting talent and having some success, he wasn't winning in the moment, and they let him go. And I get it. You got to win basketball games to keep your job. But it can go awry. And it absolutely did at the University of Portland. Could that happen at Pepperdine? I don't know. Doug Christie's an assistant coach for the Chicago Bulls. Perhaps they'll bring an alumni back who doesn't have college coaching experience. It's not exactly the same as what happened with Terry Porter. He wasn't an alumni, but he was a Portland legend. Who knows? Regardless, the fact that Javon Porter, Houston Millett, and Michael Ajayi have entered the transfer portal is not a surprise, but this is a ton of talent out the door. We'll start with Millett, 15 points, 3 boards, 2.5 assists, 42% from 3 last year. He's a junior. Through his 3-year career at Pepperdine, he averaged about 14 points, shot 37.5%. He was an all-freshman team member in 21-22. He decommitted from Penn State before he committed to Pepperdine out of high school. The Penn State head coach at the time was Micah Shrewsbury. Micah Shrewsbury is now the head coach at Notre Dame. I'm just going to float out there that Houston Millett could be a guard playing at Notre Dame next season. Just throwing it out there. Javon Porter, younger brother of both Michael and Jonte Porter, both playing in the NBA. Michael Porter Jr., of course, star small forward for the Denver Nuggets, the defending national champions. Both Jonte and Michael Porter went to Missouri. Feels like there's a possibility that Javon, who was born in Columbia, could end up at Missouri following in his brother's footsteps. Averaged 16.6 boards, 1.7 assists this year. Only played 21 games because of injury. As a freshman, though, he averaged 12 points and 7 rebounds. Shot 35% from 3, 6'11" big, can space the floor. NBA talent, legitimate scouts watching him every single game. Could end up declaring for the draft this year. Not sure if he'll actually go, but at least get some feedback. But he's not going to be at Pepperdine next year. Wouldn't shock me if he's at Missouri. A couple other schools, maybe USC shows some interest. Maybe Colorado can convince him to come out and be closer to his brother. Who knows what might happen there with Javon. And then Michael Ajayi. 17 points, 10 boards, 2 assists, 47% from 3. Ajayi was excellent this year. 6'7" guard. He is from Kent, Washington. He junior college player, was at Pierce College in Washington before he came to Pepperdine this last season. All WCC player. The most likely of these 3 to potentially end up at Gonzaga. I do not think that any of these guys are coming to Gonzaga. WCC players transferring to Gonzaga is just historically not something that has happened. Yes, the transfer portal has made more transfers happen, has also made more intra-conference transfers happen. This is a true statement. I just don't see it as being super likely. Ajayi, though, I get it. He's a big guard. That's what Gonzaga wants. He would probably start at the 3 over Steel Venters, over Dusty Stromer. That's where it gets complicated. I don't think Mark Few wants to bring somebody in to start over those guys. It's a bad look. There's going to be some bad blood, some frustration. I just don't think it's going to happen. Just logistically, it doesn't sound like it makes sense. As much as on paper, Michael Ajayi is a really good fit. More than likely, Michael Ajayi could end up being teammates with Zoom Diallo at the University of Washington. That, to me, makes a lot of sense. Like a lot of sense. He played for Lorenzo Romar, who has connections at the University of Washington. He is from the Seattle area. UW lost Severe Wheeler and Paul Mulcahy. It is a clear-cut fit for Ajayi to go to Washington. Zoom and Ajayi, by the way, with a good coach, if they do bring in Danny Sprinkle, that UW team could be good soon if that comes together. Final thing I want to talk about here to close out the week, Gonzaga baseball at Wichita State this weekend. Haven't seen Gonzaga and Wichita State line up all that much, but it still gives me flashbacks as somebody who was a senior in college when they lost to that 9-seeded Shockers team, that 2012-2013 season. The Zags play Friday at 4, Saturday at noon, and Sunday at 11 Pacific time. They recently took 2 out of 3 from Minnesota in the Big Ten. After that, they lost on Wednesday on the road at SIU Edwardsville. That is a tough loss for the Zags, 5-4 for the score on that one. Now they're 3-11 on the year. Granted, 6 of those 11 games have come against top 25 ranked teams, 3 against UCLA, 3 against Vanderbilt. That means they are 1-5 in their 6 games against ranked teams, but they're also 2-8 otherwise. Still a rough season for the Zags. As a team, they are batting .217. Their on-base percentage is .315. Their slugging percentage is .312. Meanwhile, opponents are hitting .293 with a .412 OBP and a .504 slugging percentage. Basically, they are getting outworked badly in terms of what they're putting out as a hitting output and what they are putting out as a pitching output. Lots of season left. I mean, a whole bunch of seasons still to be played. This team is young. This team hasn't gelled all that much. Baseball is a long season. It's different in this early part of the season when the weather hasn't gotten better yet. I think this team has potential to grow in a significant way, but they're in a tough spot right now. Hopefully they can build off the momentum of taking a series sweep against Minnesota last week and do that again here against the Shockers of Wichita State, because it's always going to feel good to see Gonzaga beat Wichita State, at least for me, and I know many of you who are still struggling from that loss a decade ago. That's going to wrap it up for us today here on the Locked On Zags podcast. Thank you all so much for making the show your first listen or your first watch of the day. We'll be back on Monday, and we will be talking about the NCAA tournament. We'll know where Gonzaga's playing, who Gonzaga's playing, who else is in the region. We're going to cover all of that, as well as the same situation. Actually, we won't have that for the women's team yet because they'll have selection Monday, but we'll get to that on Tuesday's show as we get you ready for the madness that is March. Thanks again for listening, and until next time, as always, go Zags.